Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Liam Decker returns to his grandfather's remote cabin, he finds it bulldozed, erased by a powerful HOA claiming ownership. But the land is his, and they've made one fatal mistake. They woke a man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The war for legacy begins. I hadn't been back to that stretch of woods in years. The road, if you could call it that, was more memory than gravel, a narrow path snaking through timberland, swallowed by vines and thyme. But that cabin, tucked into the lake bend like an old secret, had never left my mind. It was my grandfather's. He built it by hand in the 60s, one log at a time, before Lakewood Rise was even a thought in a developer's head. And now, at 42, freshly retired from the Forestry Service, I had finally decided to breathe life back into it. I brought a contractor with me, Travis Haller, a no-nonsense guy with calloused hands, and a tape measure always hooked to his jeans. We met early that spring morning, coffee in hand, and set out to scout the site for restoration. It was supposed to be a nostalgic trip, productive, even hopeful, but what we found was a goddamn nightmare. The first red flag was literal, those bright HOA-branded flags they string up like they're laying claim to Mars. Then came the gravel, freshly laid, too neat, too official. Concrete posts line the trail, stamped with the Lakewood Rise HOA logo in tacky faux gold. They hadn't just upgraded the path, they had colonized it. We drove slowly, Travis squinting through the windshield. "This wasn't here 6 months ago," he muttered. I didn't reply. My stomach had already started sinking. By the time we cleared the last turn, I could see the clearing. Or what used to be a clearing. The cabin. My cabin was gone. I stepped out of the truck like I was walking into a wake. No walls, no roof, no porch swing where my granddad used to sit with his thermos and tell me stories about panthers that probably never existed. Just splinters. The stone foundation was cracked down the middle, and someone had the gall to dump the remains in a rusted dumpster pushed to the side like trash day at a demolition site. And in the center of the lot stood a clean, professionally printed sign. Future site of HOA Lakewood Rise Community Pavilion and Scenic Overlook. I stood frozen, not angry, yet not confused, just stunned. Like someone had erased part of me and penciled in a park bench. Travis whistled under his breath. "Jesus, Liam, they leveled it." I don't remember walking, I just remember yelling. There were workers on site, spreading gravel, checking blueprints. A foreman in an orange vest saw me coming and raised a hand like I was trespassing on my own damn soul. I asked the question that only has one answer and somehow still heard the wrong one. "Who authorized this?" The foreman shrugged. "HOA said it was abandoned property. We got permits, sites being prepped for development." "Bullshit," I snapped, pulling the deed from my backpack like a sheriff in a western. "This land's mine. It's always been mine." To his credit, the foreman backed off when I said I was calling the sheriff. Didn't argue, didn't fight, probably used to people showing up too late. An hour later, Sheriff Colton arrived in his dusty cruiser, gray mustache twitching as he read the deed and property tax receipts I handed him. I even showed him the GPS coordinates from my forestry maps, the old survey lines drawn by my grandfather himself, and tax records going back a decade. Colton adjusted his hat and looked around the site. "You're telling me the HOA built this without checking who owned the land?" "Looks like it." He rubbed his jaw and let out a low whistle. "Well, they're gonna have a hell of a time explaining this one." I didn't say anything. I was still looking at the place where the porch used to be. That cabin wasn't just lumber and nails. It was memory, legacy, blood and sweat. And now it was a damn pile of splinters. Colton took photos. He radioed in to initiate a property dispute case. He said words like pending investigation and freeze construction. None of it meant anything right then, because the one thing that should never have happened had already happened. They tore down my cabin on land they didn't even own. The next morning, I was in town before sunrise, running on 2 hours of sleep and a belly full of spite. The HOA office sat like a smug little cube at the edge of Lakewood Rise. Glass front, polished stone, and the kind of sterile landscaping that screamed, "We fine people for planting the wrong color roses." Inside, I was greeted by synthetic smiles. A young receptionist with perfect teeth asked if I had an appointment. I said, "No, but you're going to want to call whoever thinks they own my land." Her smile cracked just a little. Karen Mulroy came out 5 minutes later. Perfectly pressed blazer, hair like a coiled weapon. She gave me that politician's handshake, dry, firm, detached. Mr. Decker, I'm Karen Mulroy, president of the HOA. How can I help you? You can start by explaining why your people bulldozed my property. If she was rattled, she didn't show it. I'm not sure I follow. Which property exactly? 45 acres at the northeast edge of the lake. My family's owned it since the 60s. You tore down my cabin to build your scenic overlook. She blinked once slowly. That parcel? I was under the impression it was unclaimed land. Our community master plan shows it designated as a green space buffer zone. I pulled out the paperwork like it was a loaded gun. This is my deed, and here's 10 years of paid property taxes. I've got GPS logs, surveys, everything. That land is mine. You destroyed private property. She didn't even glance at the pages, just tilted her head with a faux concerned smile. Well, I'm not a legal expert. If you believe there's been a mistake, I encourage you to contact our HOA attorney. We don't handle disputes directly. I narrowed my eyes. This wasn't a mistake. You didn't even check the ownership. You just assumed no one would notice. She crossed her arms, dropping the polite tone. That land had been unused for decades. It was a hazard. We were well within our rights to rehabilitate it for community use. If your claim is legitimate, you can file a complaint through the county. I could see it now. She wasn't stupid. She was betting on inertia, on paperwork, on me giving up, and she had the confidence of someone who'd pulled this kind of stunt before. I'm not going away, I told her. You better pray this doesn't end in a courtroom. Karen smiled, real this time, cold, confident. Then I suggest you prepare your documentation thoroughly. I walked out of that office like I was walking off a battlefield I hadn't realized I'd already entered. The next few days were a blur of county calls, survey maps, and bureaucratic hell. The local land office still had my parcel listed under my name, but when I asked for a current plat map, I nearly choked. There it was, my land, shaded in HOA green, as if it had always belonged to them. And below the parcel number, a tiny digital note, transfer recorded March. 4 months ago. I hadn't signed a damn thing. That night, I sat at my dining table, every document spread out like a forensic crime board. I called my lawyer, Mason Fleming, sharp as razors, old friend of my father's. He came over in jeans and a denim jacket, still smelled like tobacco and engine oil. Let me guess, he said. Some HOA thinks they're above the law. I showed him everything. My deed, the county plat map, the new transfer file, the old tax statements. He leaned over the paperwork like he was examining the corpse of a dirty trick. See this? He said, tapping the digital signature. This is supposed to be yours, but that's not your signature. Damn right it's not. He flipped through to the metadata file. And the person who processed this entry, Jared M. Colebrook, used to be county records, now consults for real estate development firms. My stomach clenched. You think they planted the map? I think, Mason said, we're looking at a slow-motion land theft. They dressed it up in planning board language and bet you wouldn't notice. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Time to make them regret that bet. We didn't waste time. Mason called in a handwriting analyst the next morning, retired FBI, half blind but sharp as a tack. I handed him the printout of the supposed land transfer agreement with my signature at the bottom, and he didn't even need a magnifying glass. Whoever did this, he said, tapping the page, has the grace of a drunk squirrel. This isn't even a decent forgery. He laid out his findings in technical language, mismatched angles, pressure inconsistencies, amateur tracing marks. He'd seen prison letters with more authentic signatures. The best part? The digital record of the transfer had a timestamp. And guess what? It was filed on a Friday night just before midnight by Jared Colebrook. That same guy Mason had mentioned, now moonlighting with HOA-friendly developers. We drove to the county clerk's office with copies in hand. When I told the receptionist I wanted to challenge a land transfer, her face twitched. Not surprised, just resigned, like she'd seen this movie before. After 20 minutes of paperwork, a supervisor came out, tie crooked, eyes baggy. You're here about Parcel 4, 13-E? That's right. Mr. Decker, he said, glancing down at my documents. There's already an active zoning project on that land. Shoreline beautification, HOA backed. I handed him my ID and property tax history. Funny. No one told the actual owner. He scanned the documents and frowned deeper with each page. Then I dropped the bomb, our forensic report, and Colebrook's digital signature. His tone changed instantly. I'm going to need to escalate this. Within an hour, we were sitting with the deputy registrar and a legal clerk. They reviewed everything twice, asked cautious, lawyerly questions. Then came the part that turned the room cold. There's no notarized record of this transfer, the clerk said, tapping on her screen. It just appears, uploaded from an internal admin account. No scanning log, no original on file. Translation? I asked. Someone made this thing up from inside the system. The deputy looked grim. Mr. Colebrook left the clerk's office last year under internal investigation. No charges, but let's just say this isn't the first inconsistency tied to his name. I looked at Mason. Can we pull the original paper trail? They never existed, he muttered. It was digital all the way. Clean falsification. We walked out with a certified report in hand, probable forgery, no record of legal transfer, and formal recommendation to freeze any zoning activity on the disputed land until further investigation. But apparently, Lakewood Rise hadn't gotten the memo, because by the time I drove back out to the property that afternoon, the place was crawling with construction crews. Fresh concrete, survey markers, and what looked like a trailer office had popped up in the clearing. They were installing something, probably drainage lines, and workers were pounding in metal stakes where my porch used to be. I parked my truck just outside the flagged perimeter and stormed over to the foreman, who recognized me immediately. I told you, I snapped. This is private land. You're trespassing on an active dispute. He didn't argue, just pulled out a folded sheet, signed by none other than Karen Mulroy. This is the development order, HOA approved. Yeah? Well, the sheriff's department has my title, and now the county's investigating your permits. You keep working, you're liable. I took photos of everything: trucks, workers, stakes, poured concrete. Then I called the county inspector's office and left a message. This is Liam Decker. The HOA is actively building on disputed land. I have evidence, and I want a site visit. The foreman yelled something about not being paid enough for this kind of drama, then walked off toward his truck. I was halfway back to mine when I noticed something off. The left side of my rear tire looked low. I knelt down and ran my fingers across the rubber. Gash. A clean one. Slashed. I stood there for a second, staring at it like it might apologize. By the time I got it patched and limped home, my phone was blowing up. Travis, the contractor I'd originally brought out to survey the cabin, had left me 3 voicemails. Call me, his last message said. It's urgent. When I got him on the line, his voice was tight, shaky. Liam, the trailer, my tools, everything's gone. Gone? Burned. Whole damn trailer. Fire hit around 2 a.m. Caught nothing else. Just mine. He'd already filed a fire report. The investigator was calling it undetermined origin, likely external ignition, which was bureaucratic for maybe arson, maybe not, and definitely no cameras. We sat in silence for a moment. He finally asked, "You think it's connected?" I didn't answer because we both already knew the answer. I didn't sleep that night. I kept pacing around my living room like a caged animal, my boots leaving scuff marks on the hardwood. Every time I tried to sit, I thought about Travis's burned-out trailer, the slashed tire, the smug sign in the clearing calling my land their community pavilion. By morning, I wasn't tired. I was furious. I called Mason, gave him the rundown, and he said exactly what I expected. "They're trying to wear you down," he muttered. "Intimidation, escalation, slow burn. Classic strategy when you don't have the law on your side." "Then we go to court," I said, already drafting the emergency injunction. By mid-afternoon, we had a temporary restraining order in place, signed by a county judge. No further construction on parcel 413-E until the ownership dispute was resolved. Any violations could be prosecuted. I printed 5 copies of that court order, laminated one, and drove straight back to the site. Except by the time I got there, the site looked more like a war zone. They weren't just digging foundations, they were installing plumbing. Excavators were clawing trenches. Orange hard hats were everywhere. And right in the middle of it all stood Karen Mulroy, in a white linen blazer, sunglasses on, arms folded like a queen, overseeing her kingdom. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight past the workers, handed the laminated order to the foreman, and said, "This is a legal stop work order, signed, sealed, delivered. I want every truck off this property by sunset." He took it, glanced at Karen, and stepped back. Karen barely blinked. "Liam, you're trespassing on a designated project site." "No, Karen, you're trespassing on my goddamn land." She gave a fake, tight smile. "You're making this harder than it has to be." I leaned in. "And you're about to find out how hard a federal judge can hit when he smells fraud." I turned and walked away before she could get another word out. That night, I parked my truck on the edge of the property again, this time with a camera running from the dash and 2 motion-activated trail cams hidden along the tree line. Paranoia was no longer optional. The next morning, my phone lit up with a call from the sheriff's department. "Mr. Decker, your truck. It's been vandalized again. Looks like they smashed the windows and poured sugar in the gas tank. Anyone see it happen?" "No witnesses. No cameras nearby except yours." I reviewed the footage. A figure in a hoodie, middle of the night. Couldn't see the face, but the stride looked familiar, arrogant, confident. It wasn't just random mischief. Someone wanted me off that land. Fast. Later that day, Travis called again. The fire department had finished their report. The trailer was torched with accelerant. Likely deliberate, they wrote, but insufficient evidence for a criminal referral, which meant nothing would happen. No one would be held responsible. No one would pay. I stood out on the edge of my land that evening, hands in my coat pockets, staring at the gaping pit where my cabin used to stand. All around it, steel stakes marked the bones of someone else's dream. A community deck, a boardwalk, a gazebo. Everything designed to look like it belonged. It didn't. None of it did. I hadn't asked for a war. I hadn't asked for my memories to be bulldozed or my name to be faked into a land transfer like I didn't exist. But now they had burned my friend's equipment, damaged my truck twice, and looked me in the face like I was the intruder. I was done reacting. That night, I wrote out a list: county press contacts, real estate reporters, legal advocacy groups. I pulled out every photo I had, from the cabin in the 60s, my grandfather fishing off the dock, to the ruins and that polished HOA sign gleaming above the wreckage. I wasn't going to just win this fight. I was going to make damn sure everyone in the county saw exactly how the Lakewood Rise HOA operated when no one was watching. The post went live at 6:47 a.m. A photo carousel on Facebook and Reddit titled "HOA destroyed my cabin on land I still own. Here's the proof." First slide was my grandfather in front of the cabin, circa 1974. Next, the rubble. Then, a copy of my deed. Then the laminated stop-work order. And finally, a close-up of that smug HOA sign surrounded by construction debris. By lunch, it had over 12,000 shares. People were angry. Veterans groups, landowner forums, even local teachers chiming in about how HOA rules were getting out of control. I'd barely finished my coffee before the first call came in from a local news anchor in Asheville. "Mr. Decker, we'd love to do a segment. Human interest, land rights, community corruption. We'll send a crew out tomorrow." That afternoon, a guy from TikTok with 100,000 followers DM'd me asking if he could fly a drone over the property for content. I told him, "You can do whatever you want, just don't trip over my trail cams." By evening, my inbox was full. Offers of help. Horror stories. One email stood out. A former land surveyor named Greg Sorensen. Retired now, but he said he'd dealt with Lakewood Rise HOA back in 2018. "I turned down a job with them," he wrote, "because their lead developer asked if we could gray out a property line on a map to speed up a project." I smelled something then. "Yours isn't the first land they've tried to absorb." I forwarded it straight to Mason. The next day, the news crew showed up. Reporter, cameraman, drone pilot. I met them on the charred edge of what used to be my cabin. We did the whole thing on camera. The history, the sledgehammer demolition, the faked map. I walked them through every step, right up to the destroyed truck and the fire that never got investigated. By that evening, the story was on the local news. Then regional, then national. "Retired forester battles HOA over illegally demolished family cabin," ran one headline. Another said, "North Carolina man exposes HOA land, grab with drone footage and fire report." Karen, of course, responded. HOA released a press statement calling it a tragic misunderstanding, claiming they had every reason to believe the parcel had been abandoned. They spun it like I was a recluse who'd left a shack to rot and that they were heroes returning the shoreline to the people. But it was too late. People had seen the proof. The blowback was swift. That's when Sandra Albright called me. District prosecutor, third-generation North Carolinian, and apparently the kind of woman who didn't like her office being made a fool of. She met me and Mason in person 2 days later, wore a gray suit, no makeup, and an expression that could curdle paint. "I'm opening a formal investigation," she said. "I want everything. The digital metadata, the fire reports, the signatures, the timeline. We're treating this as a suspected case of property fraud and destruction of private assets." She laid out what they already had. No notarized deed transfer in county records. Jared Colebrook's access logs to the land registry system during off hours. 2 other complaints from residents in nearby counties about suspicious HOA developments connected to the same legal firm. Then she looked at me and said, "If you're up for it, Mr. Decker, we're going after them hard." I just nodded. Later that night, a second email from Greg the surveyor came in. Attached were photos from his old files, early versions of the Lakewood Rise development plan. On one of them, dated 7 years ago, my land was marked with a red circle and handwritten words. "Strategic target for future shoreline unification. Possibly vacant?" No question marks now. The investigation moved faster than I expected. 1 week after the news broke, the county issued an order halting all development within Lakewood Rise pending legal review. Karen stopped smiling in press photos. A few HOA board members resigned, quietly without statements, like rats slipping off a ship before it tilted too far. Then, out of nowhere, she reached out. The message came through my lawyer's office. Karen Mulroy wished to meet informally to discuss a resolution. No lawyers, no cameras, just a civil conversation between neighbors. Mason looked at me over his coffee. "It's a trap." "Yeah," I said. "And I'm bringing a net." We met at a boutique cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place with overpriced croissants and reclaimed wood furniture. Karen showed up 10 minutes late, all smiles, no apology. Her perfume arrived before she did. She wore a pale blue blazer and carried a leather folio like she was about to pitch me on a beachfront timeshare. "Liam," she said, sitting across from me like this was a parent-teacher conference, "we've both had a rough few weeks." "Some rougher than others," I said. She exhaled softly. "Look, I know things have gotten out of hand, emotions, public opinion, press chaos, but we don't need to go to war over a few acres of woodland and a derelict cabin." I didn't answer, just let her talk. She opened her folio and pulled out a neat little bundle, a check, already written out, and a pre-filled agreement. "We're offering you $250,000, she said. "In exchange, you drop your claims, retract your statements, and transfer Parcel 413-E to the Lakewood Rise Homeowners Association. We'll also give you a lot further inland, more accessible, easier to develop. Plus, this way, no more courtrooms." She slid the paper across the table with a manicured hand. I glanced at it, feigning interest. The check was real, the signature hers. But the agreement was a minefield. It wasn't a settlement, it was a surrender. Hidden among the legalese was a clause stating that by signing, I would irrevocably acknowledge the HOA's rightful ownership of all structures and improvements previously located on said parcel, and waive all claims of property destruction, emotional distress, or financial damages resulting from the development. Worse, any further public statements regarding said parcel or its history shall be deemed defamatory. It was a bribe. A damn slick one. A muzzle, a handout, and a knife in the back, all in one document. "Very generous," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Mind if I record this part for my lawyer, just so I get the terms right?" Her smile twitched. This was meant to be informal. "And yet," I said, tapping the screen, "you just offered me money to sign over land I still legally own, and to shut up about how you illegally bulldozed my cabin." She froze for a split second. Just long enough to see the wheels spinning in her head. Then the mask snapped back into place. "I suggest you think carefully, Liam. This could all go away." "It already is," I said. "Just not the way you wanted." I stood, tucked the paper back into her folio, and left without another word. I had everything I needed. Mason nearly spat out his coffee when he heard the recording. "This," he said, playing it back, "isn't just desperate. This is admissible." The next day, we handed it to Prosecutor Albright. She listened with dead eyes, nodding at the parts that mattered. When it was over, she calmly added attempted inducement to commit fraud and tampering with an active legal process to the stack of charges she was already preparing. Within 72 hours, Karen's bank accounts were frozen, and the judge issued a subpoena for all internal HOA communications. The sheriff's office executed a search warrant at HOA headquarters. Boxes of files, hard drives, even Karen's personal laptop, all bagged and tagged. In the middle of it all, someone leaked one of the emails to the press. He won't last. The cabin's gone. He hasn't lived there in years. Just get it on the books and we'll lock it down before the summer people start asking questions. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a strategy. The subpoenas landed like a hammer. It was one thing to know they were crooked, another thing entirely to have the receipts. Prosecutor Albright's team went through the HOA's emails, internal memos, and meeting transcripts like bloodhounds with a scent. And what they uncovered was worse than I expected. Turns out my land was just the start. Lakewood Rise had a pattern, targeting parcels on the lakefront that looked unoccupied or underutilized, then reclassifying them in long-term development plans, often without ever notifying the actual owners. There were at least 4 other cases where small lots were quietly absorbed into green zone expansions or community beautification corridors. Some people had died, some had moved, and some just didn't fight back. Karen wasn't alone either. Her lawyer, a slick bastard named Douglas Weaver, had been helping her file rezoning requests with minimal oversight, often pushing them through county channels by exploiting vague language in local codes. The same name, Weaver, was all over internal drafts, emails, and zoning suggestions dating back years. The county clerk's office, under pressure from the growing media firestorm, reopened every land transfer linked to HOA projects in the last decade. The dominoes started falling fast. And then, finally, came the formal charges: conspiracy to commit property fraud, document falsification, destruction of private property, attempted inducement of silence through fraudulent settlement, criminal trespass, abuse of municipal planning influence. Karen was arrested at her home just past sunrise. I got a photo sent to me, her in a pink bathrobe, hair undone, sunglasses barely hiding the panic. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. But God, it was something. Weaver turned himself in that afternoon, already lawyered up, looking to cut a deal. I hoped he'd turn on Karen faster than HOA members turned on each other when the news hit. By that point, public sentiment wasn't just in my corner, it was on fire. People were calling for the dissolution of the HOA entirely. A petition hit 50,000 signatures. A county supervisor proposed emergency legislation requiring all HOAs to register land projects with public-facing notice systems. But even with Karen gone, the damage wasn't done being undone. I got word from a friend at the zoning board that HOA contractors were still billing the project, pouring concrete, ordering materials, acting like this thing wasn't dead in the water. So Mason and I filed a formal motion with the court demanding a total freeze and a restoration order. We won. Judge Langston not only banned further work, but ordered the site returned to its previous condition, pending full review of damages. I went back to the land that day. Not with anger, not with rage, just with weight. The construction trailers were gone. The workers, the pylons, the flag markers, gone. All that was left was the hole, the raw cavity where the cabin had stood. Bits of burned insulation, cracked stone, that final insult still sitting in the dirt. But something had shifted. When I looked down that evening, I saw county workers with tape measures and 2 guys from a local construction crew I didn't know, volunteers. They said they'd seen the story and just wanted to help. A month ago, I stood on this ground and saw ashes. Now I was starting to see foundation. 6 months later, the cabin stood again. Same footprint, same layout, same screened-in porch that creaked when you leaned on it just right. I used the original floor plans my grandfather had sketched out in pencil, smudged with decades of coffee and sawdust. We rebuilt it exactly as it had been. Not because I was sentimental, but because I was stubborn. The lumber was new, the windows double-paned this time, and the foundation reinforced with steel rebar. But the heart of it was still there. Every beam, every nail felt like a middle finger raised against everything Karen and her army of clipboard tyrants had tried to do. A local carpenter donated the front door. The veterans group from Asheville sent over a carved sign to mount above it. Property of Decker family since 1962. Still standing. And below it, I nailed my own addition, a simple plank with burned lettering. They tried to build someone else's dream here. Now mine stands again. Karen didn't show up to sentencing. She pled out a few weeks before trial, likely trying to save what scraps of her real estate license were left. The judge gave her 7 years, 2 suspended, and ordered personal restitution. The HOA's assets were frozen, audited, and ultimately seized by the county. Most of their officers resigned or fled like roaches under a kitchen light. Lakewood Rise, gone. Technically, it still exists on paper, some shell of an entity, but it's under Temporary County stewardship now. The HOA was formally dissolved by court order. Residents now vote through an interim civic council. For the first time in years, they get to make decisions without fear of fines for having a non-neutral mailbox. One woman even came up to me in the hardware store, elderly, with a limp and a hard stare, and said, "I've lived there 20 years. Never liked Karen. I'm sorry we didn't stop her sooner. I didn't need the apology, but I appreciated the honesty." Travis rebuilt his trailer and refused to let me pay for it. "Hell," he said, "you gave me the most viral arson story of my life." Business is booming. Even Mason smiled when the final settlement cleared. The court awarded me $1.6 million in damages, enough to rebuild the cabin, pay legal costs, and keep some tucked away for the inevitable day someone else decides my land looks too available. But money wasn't the point. Some things you don't sell. Some things you don't sign away for convenience or smooth over with PR statements and legal fog. Some things, like legacy, like land, like truth, you fight for, even when it's slow. Especially when it's dirty. I still walk the lake path sometimes. The old gravel trail is overgrown again. The fake HOA signs long since pulled down. Nature has a way of reclaiming what people mess up. So do I.